All right, it's time to film my Q3 favorites. These are in no particular order. These are just books that I wanted to gush about some more because they were the highlights of Q3, so books that I read in July, August, and September. Starting with 2 novellas, because if you don't know, in July I was reading a bunch of novellas. I was ranking all of the Hugo-nominated novellas. The first one I'll talk about is And What Can We Offer You Tonight? This one was the one that was nominated and won the Nebula, and I ended up reading for that project. And this one was just like such a unique, immersive reading experience for me. When I think back on this book, I think vividly of the setting. I think about how it's this post-apocalyptic dystopian economy and how dark and oily the water was in this brothel that we're in. But I also remember how that's paired with the almost vibrant color of a vigilante revenge story, something similar to like Batman or something like that. Like, I just remember that kind of sensory experience, and I loved that our main character is someone who has found a place in the system that's safe, does not want to rock the boat. They are safe. If they don't have a job, they can be killed. That's the system, that's the dystopian we are in. And one of her co-workers / friends was abused and harmed and killed by one of the patrons at their brothel, but comes back to life as a vigilante zombie. And it's this main character's experience with how she feels about the new status quo. It's 70 pages, it's rich, it's dense, but also lyrical and fluid. I want to read so many works by this author. I think there's a trilogy that I really want to try out, but the imagination and just how it had a lot of similar things to other works I read, but it came together to me in such a different package than what I'm used to, is why it's on this list. The next one is one that I do think, as time has gone by, has become my favorite novella of that project, which, spoiler alert, is different from that video. But times change, opinions evolve, and that's The Past is Red by Catherine M. Valente. The more I think about this book, the more it sticks with me. This story is about Tetley. She lives on this trash island. So this is a future where climate disasters have occurred and now we must live on trash islands. There is no more land. Flooding has occurred on a massive scale. And Tetley is hated by her society. And it's her recounting and telling you her story, essentially. And it feels very fairy tale-esque. This, like, you know, isolated, almost witch-like creature. But she's not a witch, but it reminds me of those elements. And the world itself, first of all, these like trash piles and how they're put together and how we get little tidbits of how we got here and how their society works, how people even get their names. Fascinating. But Tetley is such a strong voice of a character. She is hated by all. She is in what we would determine as a post-apocalyptic dystopian future. And she loves her world. She thinks her world is wonderful. She can only be optimistic. And I love her. And I think because she was so appreciative of what she had in life, even when she had so little, it made me appreciate my life. It made me not feel as doom and gloom about climate disasters. Like, they're still important to think about. There's still a lot going wrong. But to read a climate sci-fi that wasn't just so depressing was nice. And for me, it wasn't that depressing because of Tetley. Even though, like I said, no one's nice to Tetley. Her story is not optimistic or hopeful, except through her eyes. And I think that's something I really liked about this novella. I had a great time. I own a copy, and I can't wait to consume it again one day. Another book I read that month is a graphic novel compilation, Far Sector, which did win the Hugo, unsurprisingly. I really enjoyed it. Leave it to Jemison to get me to A, give 5 stars to a graphic novel, which I don't think I've ever done, and B, like a noir story. I mean, if anyone could, I guess it would be her. And this is the story about our Green Lantern, Jo. She's going to this planet that has 3 alien species, which are super fun to unpack, and the world building is delivered exquisitely. And she's trying to figure out who committed the first murder that's happened on this planet, I think for like 500, 300, an absurd amount of time since there's been violence, because this planet does not allow people to have emotions. That's how they decided to stop all their Civil War problems, is by removing emotions. And it's kind of a discussion of the pros and cons of emotions. There is still civil unrest and how to manage that. How do we get rid of the corruption or manage the corruption? And I loved its exploration of this story with Jo as our main character, who is like the only creature with emotions, and how she unpacks that and handles it. There is like, you know, a dark web or like black market for a drug that can make someone feel emotions temporarily that we explore. the three species. One is plant-like, one is more carnivorous, and one is just a computer AI sort of sentient being, and we get to explore all three worlds and how they work. It's got Jemison's world building, but with visuals, and it has her voice. Somehow I was worried it wouldn't have her voice, but it has her voice, and it's great. And part of that is because it's noir. Jo's inner monologue, good snark. It's good snark. So I highly recommend it. It definitely left an impression on me. Next up, we will go with, so now we're basically in August was like the best month of my life, because unfortunately I only have one book to talk about from September. The rest of these are August. So in August, I read Build Your House Around My Body, which I've talked about a lot recently, especially in like my spooky books recommendation, but this is like a literary horror that stole my heart from page like 2. I don't know, it may be page 1. And this is the story of what happened to Winnie in Vietnam. She goes missing one day. What happened? And along the way, we learn the stories of so many individuals and the history of the land, and there is supernatural qualities to this horror. And we're trying to unpack what happened, and also just the messiness behind all these characters. It's super non-linear, but the writing just sucked me in. It had haunted houses, which I loved. It had shape-shifting. It had possession. It had really creepy past stories that we got to learn about. I loved the interwoven threads. I loved the ending. It's great. Ryan's reading it right now, and I cannot wait for him to be done so we can talk about it. This next one, no surprise that it's on the list because I've been raving about it, and that's Light from Uncommon Stars. Yeah, this is the blendiest blendy book. We've got contemporary, we got sci-fi, and we got fantasy. We've got Katrina. She's a violin prodigy. She's running away from home because she's a trans woman who is abused at home because of her identity. Along the way, she runs into a teacher of violin prodigies who basically trains people to then get them to sign a deal with her to sell their souls to the devil, because she needs to sell 7 souls to the devil for a deal that she made in the past. And Katrina is going to be her next student. And we have an owner of a donut shop who is from outer space. These are the elements, and it works beautifully, and I love it. And it's one of those books that I love so much that I totally get when people don't connect with it. I see the critiques. I hear you. It was not my experience. Like, all of the pacing inconsistencies people talk about, I read this book in like 36 hours. I had no pacing problems, even though I can see objectively it's not a plot-driven book, but I was always captivated by these personal interactions, these personal struggles that these characters were going through, the layers, and I didn't care about if the transitions made sense for me. The climax of this story has to do with a music performance, and I have such a strong connection to music, and I'm always nervous about when it's in books because sometimes it's like, well, how do you take my love of an auditory experience and put it with words on a page? And it was accomplished. It was great. So I have a review for this, so I'll stop rambling. This next one is my favorite fantasy romance release of the year so far, and that's A Strange and Stubborn Endurance. This is wonderful. There are content warnings. The author does have it as a page in the front of the book, so I won't bring them up in case you don't want to know those, but I will say if you read those content warnings and you're like, ooh, those are things I don't like to be shown graphically on page, skip chapter 2. That's my biggest recommendation, is if you skip chapter 2, you can pretty much keep going and you understand this is what happened to my main character and this is the harm he is recovering from, if that makes sense. But, you know, this character is phenomenal. He has a best friend, and their friendship I adore. So that was my first thing. We don't even meet the romantic partner for probably like 70 pages into the book, maybe longer, because it alternates between parts between their two perspectives. One of them is first perspective, one of them is third. And so we're with our person that's from a very repressive society, and he gets harmed, and he's with his best friend, and he has to go to this other kingdom to be in an arranged marriage with this man for political reasons. And so at first I'm just with these two characters and their friendship, and I'm like, if this story was just about these two people and their friendship, I'm good. I'm completely sold. And then we meet the love interest, who is just such a sweet, considerate person who's just trying to like figure out, you know, how best to treat this new person in his life, and they weren't expecting this. They thought it was going to be a marriage with his sister. And also there seems to be someone who is out to kill his new fiance. And so the backdropping is them together trying to figure out who is messing around, because they both have different strengths. One is better at politics and one is better at more of the warrior side. And so they get to lean on each other and their strengths, and they slowly develop trust in each other. And any tension in the story has nothing to do with their relationship development because their communication is always good. There's no miscommunication between these two individuals. So all of the stress and tension and healing and growth has nothing to do with these two harming each other in indirect or direct ways, which I loved, because that meant I could focus on other things. I did guess the answer to the question, but that didn't bother my enjoyment. I still had a wonderful time. I actually even liked the reveal. I even liked the execution of it. It did feel a little melodramatic, but I kind of liked that. My first story by this author was in a short story collection, and I knew instantly I wanted to read a long form work, and I was not disappointed. I will read many more books by them because I obviously love how they write character interactions on a page, and 9 times out of 10, that's all I need to love a story. The last things that I read in August and were my favorites was a reread of The Jasmine Throne and then reading The Oleander Sword. I love the Burning Kingdoms. Is that what it's called? I think it's the Burning Kingdoms trilogy. It's pretty much up there to potential perfection for me. I like the Oleander Sword this much less than the Jasmine Throne, and I think that's just purely a premise thing. The Oleander Sword is just broader in scope. The Jasmine Throne's a little bit more isolated and claustrophobic in its setup, but the character work is still amazing. We get to expand the magic and the world building in the Oleander Sword in fascinating ways. There's so many good themes that get to be unpacked and explored. When the third book comes out, I will do a series review and I will unpack all the themes that I adore in this. I do have a standalone review for the first book. It still holds up. Basically everything I love about the first book exists in the second book. It just has a different focus, but I don't want to talk about it because that might spoil the first book. But it's great, and I feel like everyone forgot the Oleander Sword came out this year, but it did, and it's phenomenal, and there's no middle book syndrome. Oh, and my heart, there were just emotions. Things happened. Oh, I'm just remembering some of the things that happened and like messaging my friends being like, oh my god, how did this, how? So for me, I'm emotionally invested, I'm emotionally impacted by the things that happened, I'm thematically engaged. The world building I find vibrant and fun to explore and learn more about, which that's me in fantasy. That's why I'm here. I want all those things. I'm getting all those things. Wonderful. And the last book I'll briefly talk about is the one book that I did really like reading in September, and that's Shadows of Self. This was a surprise because although it's a reread and I knew I would like it, when I first read it, I gave it 4 stars, which is great. Like, a 4-star read is like, yeah, I read a book I liked. Awesome. But when I reread it, I'm like, read it in a day, and I'm like, 5 stars. What was I thinking the first time I read it? Which is me a lot of times on rereads, like, Angela, why? And I think part of it is, although I avoid spoilers, like it's my job on the internet, I actually generally have a better experience reading when I know what's going to happen. And so knowing the broad strokes of Shadows of Self for my reread, even though there were plot points I didn't remember, but broad strokes of certain character moments, etc., just had me going in with the perfect expectations, and I accepted the book exactly for the project that it was, and I read it at the exact moment I needed a cozy detective story with characters I could latch onto and just laugh with, and that's what I got. We have a whole spoiler-filled discussion of this book on my channel, so you can check that out. And yeah, I'm currently reading the 3rd book, and it's also been a lovely time. So those were my highlights of quarter 3. In some ways, a really strong quarter, and in other ways, I'm like, all my strong books ended up in 1 month specifically. What were some of your highlights of quarter 3? And if you just want to leave an emoji, leave me a fish, because I have 2 koi fish on this list. As I'm looking at the stack next to me, I have Light from Uncommon Stars and What Can We Offer Tonight have koi fish. So any type of fish. I don't necessarily think there's a koi fish emoji. But like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.